It's a great example of a question where you should see the trap coming, okay? And if you don't, you're basically locking yourself out of the 700s. You cannot get a good score if you are not able to sense danger on a question like this. Even without reading the question, look at those answer choices, right? The only difference between A and B is a positive or a negative number, right? The only difference between C and D is that same positive and negative number. That is the entire question essentially, and that's what they're hoping we mess up. So I've got to pay very close attention to that as I read the story. I already know that just by looking at the choices. But if this was also on a test, we would probably also be able to sense danger because of the question number, right? So if this is basically anything from question 15 to later to the end, to 22, then we should know that an easy answer is something to be suspicious of. Even in the first module, 15 to 22, you got to be suspicious. So there's a lot of clues if this were part of a test. Even still, you know, if you're doing this from the question bank, it's labeled as a hard question. So if you fall for the trap, how much more evidence do you need that there's going to be a trap? Anyway, let's get to it, and I'll show you the trap. A park ranger hung squirrel houses, each in the shape of a right rectangular prism for fox squirrels. Each house is a height of 11 inches. The length of each house's base is X inches, which is 1 inch more than the width of the base, the house's base, which function V gives the volume of each house in cubic inches in terms of the length of the house's base. So my general approach to things on the SAT is to plug points into equations. Now, clearly I have equations in the choices, but I also have an equation just from the reference sheet of the geometry reference sheet that they give us, right? And maybe you have this memorized anyway, but a right rectangular prism is just a box. So we have the volume of a box as length times width times height. So I'm also going to try to plug points into that, right? So the volume is kind of what we're solving for. We were told the height is 11 inches, so we can pop that in. Now is where, again, my suspicion takes over. Is they're like, okay, the length is X, so fine, I could throw in an X, but I'm very nervous about that because I know how they operate, right? They are trying to make it so that in the algebra, I lose sight of something. So my main idea is still to plug points into equations, and sometimes points can be letters, but if I can make them numbers, that's safer, right? So instead, I'm going to kind of use a side strategy here to plug points into equations, which is to arithmetize. Let me just make up a number for this X, right? Let's just make it 10 inches, okay? That way I have another way to think about every letter here, right? So X is going to be 10, and that's the length. So, okay, that's 10. Now the width, so the length, okay, is 10, which is 1 inch more than the width. So that's going to be 9, right? Because 10 is 1 more than 9, right? So now let's just calculate that. So the volume is going to be multiplying those things. I'm just going to get a regular calculator for that. 10 times 9 times 11 is 990. So that is what I want these parts of the equations to be. And I don't have to think about how the equation works, right? The number that I picked should make it work for me. So let's take a look. So this 10, right, is going to go in for all the X's here. So this first choice is going to be 11 times 10 minus 1, which is 9, right? So that's exactly what I just did. So I don't really need to do the multiplication again. I know this is going to work. Now, I don't know that that's the right answer yet because it's possible that I just happened to pick a number that has that works in multiple equations. But I do know that choice B will not work because now I'm multiplying 11 times 10 plus 1, which is 11, right? So 11 times 10 times 11 is 1,210. That's obviously wrong based on the way I did it, but that is the answer most of you are going to pick. And again, you should have seen that coming. Now I know why you're going to pick it, is that you see 1 inch more and you can't help yourself. That has to be a plus, right? 1 inch more, plus 1, right? So that is what they're counting on, is that the words you read are pulling you in a certain direction and you can't fight that impulse. And you see an answer that kind of matches with your first instinct. And again, you can't fight that impulse. You pick it and you never even suspect that you're getting it wrong. When people come out of their SAT or get their scores back and they're like, I understand, how did I get a 690? I remember the test. I only got 2 questions wrong. These are the questions that you got wrong that you never saw coming. It's this kind of thing that you didn't predict. And that's why scores are lower. It's because you fell for this trap and you never even thought about it as a potential trap when you took the test. But of course, because I arithmetized, it's not a problem for me. Now let's just double check with choices C and D for the sake of completion here. So 10 times 21 times 9. Well, I know that's not going to work, so it's way too big. I don't even need to multiply it. And this is going to be 10 times 21 times 11. And again, that's the 21 is causing the problem there, so that's no good. But there you go. No doubt in my mind, it's A. And the reason it's maybe obvious that it's going to be A is if they make x into 10, or sorry, if they make the length into x, then when they say the width is, essentially they're saying the length is 1 inch more than the width, that means the width is 1 inch less than the length. So the width has to be x minus 1, which makes perfect sense with choice A. And maybe some of you did notice that and got it right, but like, I still think you really want to arithmetize here and just put a number in that equation and think about this story in terms of numbers. Because I think that, it's much easier to realize that if you're thinking about it wrong and you're saying the length is 10 and the width is 11, when you read that sentence, the length of 10, which is 1 inch more than 11, I think you're more likely to hear that your logic is backwards, right? No. 10 is 1 inch more than 9. And then you can kind of fix the error if you were making it originally. Whereas if you're just doing this algebraically, I just think you lose track of that. And choice B is so powerfully attractive that you just can't help yourself. And I don't trust myself to resist those kinds of temptations on the SAT, which is why I create a system where I'm not even tempted, right? To me, these are just random combinations of letters and numbers. And by using the arithmetized strategy and making up a value for x to kind of think about this more concretely, I'm able to kind of not care what the equation looks like. I only care, does it work? Does it produce the result that common sense, basic math tells me it's supposed to, the result it's supposed to produce, right? So having numbers just works better because arithmetic is always better than algebra. Arithmetic is concrete. You can put it in a calculator. Algebra, conceptual, abstract. Easier to make mistakes. Set yourself up for success. Don't allow yourself to be tempted by potential traps. If you have numbers, you are maybe doing a little bit more work, but you are guaranteeing a right answer, or at least I think you are. And certainly, it's not so much more time that you wouldn't be able to spend it on the test, and I think it's worth it rather than risking an error on something that's a totally gettable question.